I remember early in my watch collecting sort of experiences, I'd walk into boutiques pretty often, and I'm sort of a known Rolex lover in this world for sure, but I've had my fair share of fascinations with Panerai. And when this came into the collection at Watches and Wonders, it kind of changed the dynamic for me. I've been trying to wear it in all kinds of scenarios, just everyday life, to see how it feels as an everyday watch for me. And I have to say that this 2mm reduction and bringing a regular production 40mm Radiomir into the collection has made a world of difference to me in how I view Panerai and considering possibly having one in my collection in the future. This is the Panerai Radiomir Quaranta, which is a reference for 40mm, which is the first time that I'm aware of a Radiomir at 40mm in the modern era in a non-limited form, which is exciting news both for me and for a lot of the normal wristed out there. This changes everything, but not without its drawbacks, of course. We're looking at a 40mm Panerai Radiomir with 30 meters of water resistance. Yes, this is a watch with diving heritage, Italian military heritage, rugged tool watch heritage that, by most accounts, is barely equipped for a hand wash in a sink. But when you look at every other piece of it, there's so much to love. First of all, it is one of the few Panerai watches I can think of that almost looks like a dress watch. What you have here on this black sunburst dial is only 12 and 6 numerals where you kind of miss the 3 and the 9 a bit, but what you have in their place are at 3 o'clock a date aperture with a matching background. At 9 o'clock you have the small subsidiary seconds. The small second sub-register has the sort of like gilt rose gold coloring, as do the hour and minute hands. And then in typical Panerai fashion, you have the faux patina, both in the lume on the hands and on the sandwich dial. Now, what's a sandwich dial? It's something that Panerai has almost made popular on its own, but basically, in the modern context, there is a sheet of luminous material on the base, and then the dial is put on top with a little bit of separation, with cutouts for the numerals that give what's called a sandwich effect. So you're seeing the luminescence come up from a bottom layer through the top dial. Now Panerai is calling this a black dial. To me, maybe it's because of the juxtaposition between the lume and the dial. It gives sort of a brown tobacco effect to it. So when the sun hits it, you get these brown shades in the sun bursting. There's a polished bezel on this watch which matches the polished case and the wire lugs. This watch does have a screw down crown, and when you unscrew the crown and examine the stem, it doesn't appear there's any sort of seal or anything that's adding extra water resistance, so it almost feels like the screw down functionality is there as sort of an homage to what a traditional Panerai would have been. And turning the watch over, you have a very, very welcome closed case back. Here you have sort of Panerai Radiomir engraved on the back, and it's brushed. The watch comes equipped with this alligator leather strap, which is very solid and has that tapering effect to it. And on the pin buckle, it's very thin and unassuming, and Panerai signed as well. And so you get a very good fit with this watch. And for someone with a smaller wrist, there's no overhang of the strap, so it's not going to be sticking out when you're wearing it. Now inside the watch is the P900 automatic movement, and while that may not appeal to the Panerai purists out there, it's convenient. It's nice to have running seconds, it's nice to have a date function. All of it is very matched to the dial aesthetic, and I think this is Panerai kind of coming full circle. So you saw over the last, let's say, decade, watches really leaning into heritage, faux patina, calling back to watches of the past. Panerai was spearheading this effort as early as the early 2000s. And as many people talk about there's sort of a Rolex roller coaster, I think there's the same thing for Panerai. Some people started at Panerai, thought it was the coolest thing in the world, then felt like their tastes evolved and maybe matured. And so it's like this kind of wonky ride where finally Panerai has heard the enthusiast cries. They love the design, but just can't wear the watch. And now you kind of have the best of both worlds. You could make the argument that this is a dainty Panerai now, that it's lost that sort of Schwarzenegger, rocky, muscular Rambo energy. And if someone like me is now able to wear a Panerai, it's kind of uncool. I'm not going to be afraid to admit that. But I think Panerai should be able to feel very good about having a watch that speaks to a wide swath of consumers. And so it's not like Panerai is giving up on its core strengths, which are the iconic luminor and the larger Radiomir pieces. It's just adding. And this kind of addition is only good for the brand. And honestly, if this is an industry-wide trend, it's only good for the industry. This model is not limited to just the classic black dial Radiomir. This came in 3 configurations this year at Watches and Wonders. So you have the black dial, which I've gravitated toward just because it speaks to sort of that iconic Panerai styling. But in addition to that, Panerai has made the Quaranta in a blue dial with a matching blue strap, which is kind of interesting because it maintains this rose gold colored hand, but the faux patina on the lume is much less pronounced on the blue and almost gives sort of like a radioactive green energy to it. So it's a different color palette and a little bit more modern, a little bit fresher looking. And maybe for the buyer who isn't so interested in Panerai heritage, but just likes the watch for what it is on its face. And then brings it home with a watch that for me went right up to the finish line but couldn't quite cross it. We have more of like a sunray silvery finish, which isn't that sort of screamy white that we want. And I think some of the aesthetics of the sandwich dial get lost here. Legibility is sacrificed because the creaminess of the lume next to this sort of silvery aesthetic of the dial, it just doesn't pop. But if you're into white dial watches, this is the one you might gravitate towards. But for me, I'm kind of a purist insofar as I like the original iconic design. I've just had a really enjoyable time wearing this watch and had a hard time taking it off.